Welcome to More Than Legal, the show where we go behind the scenes to uncover the fine print of power, purpose, and profit. I'm your host, attorney Danielle Laughlin. After almost 2 decades in the trenches of courtrooms and boardrooms, I have learned that every move leaves a mark and every deal tells a story. What will we uncover today? Let's find out. Hey, real quick, before we dive into the episode, remember, nothing you hear on this podcast is intended to be legal, financial, or tax advice. I invite you to contact any of the guests you hear by looking in the show notes for their contact information, or if you'd like to reach out to me, you can find my contact information at daniellelaughlin.com. All right, now let's get into it. Jeremiah, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
We're excited to talk to you today, and I know the audience is going to get a lot from you. So I'm going to start first with just letting you share a little bit about yourself. They're going to hear all about the bees today, but just a little bit of history about you and kind of how you found yourself in your current role and what your motivator was to start a very interesting hobby in beekeeping. I want to kind of hear a little bit about all that before we dive in on the juicy tidbits that you're going to share.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. So for me, I was just, a country boy out in outside of Athens, Georgia, born and raised there. And so I was trying to kind of, you know, play in the yard and everything else. And, there were always honeybees, just on the little clover leaves and everything else. And also just, playing in the woods, you get a nice creative imagination. And that just led me to I volunteered a lot with my local church as a teenager. Started out like, you remember those things that were cassette tapes, that you used to put in your car or your Walkman or anything else? Yeah.
I am that
So
old. Yes, I remember that.
so I started out by cleaning like the head tapes, so they could record more of those, for I guess a local sermon or whatever. And then they let me touch the soundboard and then some lights and VCR players. And I learned that I kind of liked the whole picture. And fortunately, the pastor's wife in a former life had been an ad producer, and she was like, "Oh, what you like to do is the big picture that is producing." And so at age between 13 and 15, I was like, okay, producing is what I really enjoy. And that led me to be able to at 17 go tour Dawson's Creek and see Dawson's bedroom with the set designer and just these experiences.
Fangirling.
Well, that's what the set designer told me. He's like, girls would kill to be able to walk into Dawson's bedroom like what you just did in Wilmington. And so, I, did that, and that was, awesome. And at that point, I was like, I want to be in the Producers Guild of America, the Television Academy, and I want to do this film, TV ad thing. And so that led me to working retail full time while doing projects on the weekends, which ultimately led me to work and produce on shows like Here Comes Honey Boo Boo, work on Food Network shows, working with international groups like Al Jazeera, even on some special doc news series. So and I finally got some honey beehives.
It's so awesome. So it's like a full circle. I always love the childhood stories, like I wanted to be a lawyer when I was 9, watching Matlock, which is also interesting as to how I kind of came back into the entertainment space and met you. And so the childhood stuff, you got to tap back in because it really
Yeah.
can lead you. And I think a lot of folks, especially our listeners that are entrepreneurs, they maybe have gone back and started working in their own company doing something that they really love to do. And a lot of times it is a childhood dream or something they picked up as a young person. So I just really love that story. So everybody, I am so excited because what Jeremiah is here to talk to us about today is really the lessons that we can take from beekeeping and bees and how bees live in a very systemized ecosystem. And business is a systemized ecosystem. So, what we're going to do is talk a lot about the lessons that Jeremiah has picked up, not just as a producer, but also in this beekeeping and how we can use nature to guide our principles in our businesses. So, let's get started. The very first thing I want to talk to you about today, Jeremiah, is how bees have like a shared purpose, right?
Mhm.
And it's like a strong brand, right? It's a very clear message, and they're all working on one particular goal. How does storytelling shape a business's identity and growth? That singular story that everybody's kind of working in.
So bees have one purpose: make honey, right? So that they can have a store up there, for the winter, so that they can feed their young and so that they can continue to survive. Storytelling shapes identity and growth by it helps us clearly communicate our business's purpose, right? So I think a few things that comes through is like emotional connection. Stories create a human bond for you and your audience. So if you don't have that, and it starts creating that loyalty and fostering that between you and your clients, you and your customers. So I think that's so important because how many things have you bought because of the story behind it? And
It's
you know,
true.
and even I can say like what we were just going. I can say I sell honey, but I can say, oh, I'm that childhood boy that we just talked about going through, and I had that passion forever. And you're going to be more connected to that because it's a story, because I had passion in that, and that passion carries over. So that helps clarify. My second point would be clarifying the purpose in that. So, great storytelling defines and reinforces your brand's vision internally and externally. So, a lot of times people are like, what should I tell my customers, right? But you want to make sure what are you telling your team internally? If they're not
Correct.
sold and if you've not focused that in on your team, they cannot share that. And that means if you're at a coffee shop, you want everyone from the person doing the beans and roasting them all the way to the person at the front register, to the person making the drink, all know what is the brand's vision in that. And so then, not just the one person on social media that you have putting up points. And so many that's left out so many times. So
I
that's
agree.
so a lot of the stuff for me um, is yes, you're honing in a vision, or yes, you're branding a product or making a commercial, but how is your team cohesively together on that first? Because that's my first marker of whether it's going to be a success or not.
I love it. I love it.
Um,
And we learn this internally. I mean, I used to I don't know if others experience this. Maybe some of our listeners have felt this way as well. I think that there is sometimes a fear of maybe oversharing or boring people or focusing on things that are not productive or efficient even, and I feel that sometimes the storytelling and the vision feels superfluous, and so I will say in my early journeys as an entrepreneur, I didn't really talk much about that stuff, and in hindsight I think that was a big mistake. So have you seen that? Have you seen where maybe visionaries or leaders hold back their story and negative impacts that that might have?
I have, and it's always you know what? It's just sad to me because they have so much to offer, and when you take away that humanity, um, then what do you have? I mean, if you're with your teams, 7, 8 hours or more a day, you're gonna be spending 30, 40 hours plus a week with them, and so you're gonna be spending more time than you're gonna be sleeping, spending with, your family or, any hobby or anything else, and so if you can't be authentic in that, then it really you're hurting your own business here. Um,
It's true.
your customer will take that story when we now are talking about the external part. if you're sharing a story. So we talked about the internal part, but the external part is your customer will take that story and be like, yeah, that little kid liked honeybees and now he has a honey company. But if it's just like big bold honey, sweet in taste, like who cares?
Who cares?
Like, and anything can have a story, and everything, many times, my gauge for whether I really have something good is I'll have a friend or I'll have my spouse or, a coworker will come and say, "Hey, I can tell this is a good idea because you're really passionate about it. Like you're lighting up, talking about it." Because if I'm not lighting up, then business is hard enough. There's too much grit and it's too tough. So if you don't have something that is the sticking point and the glue in there, it's gonna be hard for to then move that along to your customer externally. But you want that story where they can easily share it, where it's, you know, because I mean, even in the good old book, what is parables and stories, right?
Right.
Right,
Correct.
that were shared. I was remembering a story about curiosity about there was a businessman in Turkey and he was asking the taxi cab driver like why the curbs were higher there on the sidewalks because it's then here in the US and it was somewhere the way the water ran there and it was a little different. And so each
Interesting.
yeah, so each little thing it's about staying curious in these things, having stories. But I remembered that story because it was a story. But if you asked me to tell you how high that sidewalk was in that story, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, the
So
the
yeah,
facts, right? Yeah, the
yeah.
the facts and the dimensions and yeah, the measurements. And often in business, it's all about the measurement, right? It's all, oh, it's the bottom line. Oh, and I love that you tied it back to growth because the reality is that when you're focused on a purpose and a story, you actually grow better. You grow
Mhm.
more and you create that raving fan culture. I think that we all aspire to create in our companies. So tell us, you've led some pretty large teams, especially on your film sets and in business organizations. What kind of leadership strategies have helped you be a successful, high functioning team leader?
You know what? It's a few things. Clear expectations is where I would start. We have to, if people don't know what you expect, how are they going to measure up against your expectations? So define the roles clearly, let them know what they are, um, and those responsibilities, and that just avoids confusions to start with. A film set's a great thing. Honeybees, film sets. We can go through like a honeybee. You have worker bees, nursery bees. You even have undertaker bees. Unfortunately, for the dead bees that get pulled out of the hive, and that's their job. Just
Oh,
to, yeah, right. It's a little morbid, but it's true. But on
it's
a film set,
necessary. Yeah.
yeah, but there's everything has a role. On a film set, it's the same thing. You, if everyone thought they were gonna show up with a camera and film something, who's gonna set up the lighting? Who's going to put in the catering? Who's gonna act in it? Who's gonna be the grip and electric department, the wardrobe department, the hair and makeup department, the art department? So clearly, in a few hours, I'm going into a department head meeting for, a shoot that will be happening in a week. And, I will be meeting, and that's what we're going to be doing, going through our clear, defined roles. And so, in our responsibilities, so everyone's on the same page, so they know what the vision is and how we're going to make that happen. But also, in that, I can do that as a leader. But if I don't have empathy and I don't listen,
Mm, mhm.
where like it's one sided, you can't play a one sided pickleball or tennis game.
No,
So
no.
that's where, I think it's so key to say, "Hey, how are you doing? Is there anything that you need from me?"
Yeah.
Like, going in with your team and saying, "Is your day good? Is there anything holding you back to make this happen?" Not like, "Are you gonna make this, goal happen right now?" Like, no, no, like, "Is there anything I can provide? Is there any resource?" Because there's simple things like sometimes it can be a little bit of a a piece of tape with a sound guy, a mic keeps falling down, that's going to cost 15 minutes. And then if you need another card for a camera or something, and these little things, but that could cause your whole team to go into an hour of overtime when you're like, here's $50 that fixes this thing, but it's looking at what's causing these other folks to have these headaches. So that's what I try to really have that empathy for them, and say, hey, how are you doing? Is life good? Because if you're going through something personal at home or everything else, you know, you may need to let someone have a few days to,
Correct.
be with a family member. It will pay dividends. It's worth, in your organization. Let them have the time, bring someone else in, make it work out. Um, so that's what I would kind of, do. And lastly, empowerment and free agency. Empower them and just let them run with it. One of my mentors always said, trust but verify. So yes, go, yeah. So trust that they're going to do it, but then have the regular check-ins where you say, hey, we good? Here's the steps, and go from there. So they can
I
own
love
it.
it. Ownership, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of our core values. We like intentional growth, and in order for someone to grow, they have to have agency.
Hmm.
You can't micromanage everything.
Yeah, it helps them build confidence and commitment to the team. If they feel like they can own it, then you're giving them that. I mean, we know this even in raising kids. Like
Correct.
this isn't anything. If you let them own it, yes, people may make mistakes, but at the end of it, they learned how to do it.
Correct. And a mistake, there are some guardrails, right?
Mhm.
Certain things in business have to be done, and they have to be done at a certain time in a certain way. Lawyering is similar. There are
Mhm.
deadlines that we have to hit, and if we don't hit them, like, that's malpractice. That's a big error. Those are the types of things where you need strong guardrails and maybe a little bit more of a micromanaging. But those are very few usually, that are that critical. So I really love that. I love that you talked about the Undertaker beat. Sometimes there are roles on a team. Maybe it's not your normal role. Maybe it's not a role that you really want. Maybe it's not the sexy role. Everybody wants to be the starlet or even the producer, right? Or the founder or whatever. Those are the spotlights. And I think that a lot of times people fear the smaller roles, or maybe they feel that it diminishes them, but they're all necessary. So I think that's a really important point from the bees, right? Every bee is needed to make the hive function. Um, so whether you're in business or on a film set, leading your team, obviously trust is really key to collaborating with other people. How can leaders create a culture that fosters trust and accountability within their team?
Transparency. Be transparent with your team about your goals, your challenges, the decision making things that you're doing, because then they're bought in. You can't share every single number. There are certain things with HR matters that you can't share with your teams, but there's so many things that if you say, hey, you know what, I have a headache today. You know what? It was a rough night with my kid being up. I have an elderly parent with this, or I got rear-ended with my car, or my car broke down, or you know what? I don't totally know the answer. You know what? Bees work together, right? So let your teams work together. When the queen bee is sticky and has too much stuff all over her, it's all the worker bees that start cleaning her off so that she's okay, right?
Right.
So let your teams be there for you too, because we're all human. I think that's the thing with all this is humanity in this. So and then be consistent in your leadership. Maintain reliability so that your team can depend on your words and your actions. So they, um, we're always taught with this with 2-year-olds. Do the same actions over and over and over so that they know what they should and shouldn't do. And we're never perfect on that, but I mean that's at least the hope and the goal, right? So if we do that so that they know what we'll do in a certain, they can rely on that. And that really helps your team stay loyal to you and stay appreciated. Um, and you want to hold your teams accountable, but you have to model accountability. If you screw up, you need to be the first to say, "Hey, I made the wrong call on this. I did this, whatever. I am not getting you this. I'm telling you, I'm getting you this brief on this day at this time, but I said I was get to you Friday, but Tuesday. So, you have permission to ask me about that. Don't make them
Correct.
scared. Yeah, don't make them scared to come to you and say, "Hey, you said you're gonna get to this, and we need this a week out always for it." Because the more accountability, even with your clients, if you,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, then everyone is on the same page and it reduces so much stress. So transparency, consistency in your leadership, and then model accountability.
I love it so much, especially because, like you said, we're all human. Like, we all make mistakes. Like, there's not any of us who could show up and be like, oh, yeah, I'm always hitting on all cylinders. There's externalities that come into play, obviously, as well. So, really great advice on that point. And with the clients, sometimes I see that, like, I work directly with founders a lot, and um, the best clients are usually the best leaders, and they are often the ones who will come and say, look, I made a mistake here. This is how, I should have done this thing and I didn't do that. And so, I need your help, or I need your guidance on this. And the ones that don't perform as well are the ones that are always like holding the cards. They're like, oh, just trying to like save face almost. And it's like,
Yeah.
this is a safe space here, right? Like, it's okay. And I try to be very honest with my clients when we don't do the thing that we said, right? Like, we said we were going to get that to you Friday. We didn't. I'm sorry about that. Or we try to get ahead of it. We're supposed to get this to you today. We're not going to be able to do that. And we apologize for that. And so just trying to
Yeah.
kind of be accountable. I love that. Because everybody fails at something at some point. So it's just a real, and it's about the transparency. I think accountability and transparency are kind of the same principle, or maybe like the flip side of the same
Yeah.
principle, you know? Um,
Mhm.
so what do you think businesses can learn from film production about balancing financial constraints? This is a big one. With the creative vision, right? Because a film is a creative venture. Everyone's clear about that. In business, I don't know that we always think of it that way. What are your thoughts about that creative vision? And then, yes, of course, the finances, but how do we
Mhm.
balance those things?
It sounds simple, but it's the hardest thing to do. Prioritize essentials. Like what is clearly defined your non-negotiables, within, your vision, and allocate your resources to that. So many times we think bigger is better. I'm gonna tell a story here, so you're probably gonna remember this now. Um, there was an architect that was playing Legos with his son, and he was building this bridge, and it had the 3 pillars. And so he was about to grab 2 more blocks because the center pillar was 1 block higher than the two to the left and to the right. But you know what his son did, who was 5? He just took off the block in the middle, and they were even. And he was like, "Whoa." So sometimes it's about scaling back. And in one of the organizations that I was chair of a board for a nonprofit, we really had to come back and say, we are in 20 different things and not doing any of them well. And so we said, this year we're going to pick our top 5 priorities. And because of that, we doubled our membership. We Our members, we sent out surveys, and we got the numbers were the feedback was so much better than the year before, all by taking away stuff. We thought people were like, oh, well, people are going to be mad. No, they weren't mad because we finally were able to bring quality to them. And so I think so that's the thing is like, what do you really have to do to sell a product? What do you really have to do? I mean, there's always niceties. Um, and then innovate with constraints. That's where that agency that you're working on our last question, you bring that here in the accountability. So you're saying encourage your team to be problem solving because if they're already bought in as owners and they're bought in this thing, then they're going to come up with and give them that freedom of like, what do you have? Because I know that's the one thing I've learned. I've learned many things, I should say, on a film set, but one big thing is I don't have all the ideas. And sometimes a camera guy, my production assistant will come. I remember when I was trying to search, all these different stores for a jacket for wardrobe, and my production assistant said, "Did you try to Amazon it?" And it was such a simple thing, but I had just gotten to, and I was like, "There's no way that their Amazon could get because it was me the next day." And of course, Amazon was actually for that item. It was able to be overnighted, the right size, the perfect thing that the director wanted, everything else. And I'm this, big producer on leading 25 people on this particular set, and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and he was like, and he just laughed at me, which I deserved the laugh, but he
Yeah.
knew that he could. But I also was transparent in that, in sharing like what I was struggling that we were trying to find because the wardrobe person couldn't find it. It was just he was like, "Did you guys check Amazon?" So sometimes, but innovate with your constraints, like I like it. Like some of my favorite things early on, we're doing like 48-hour film projects where we had 48 hours, we couldn't pay a crew, and everything had to be for free to make the project because our best creativity came with constraints. Some of the biggest bombs I've ever had on a film set is when I had an executive producer who was very wealthy and money just kept on being kind of handed over, and it was his baby, and it meant that we never really defined the script well enough. It was because we just would throw some more money at it. It was like, oh, let's
Mhm.
film the same house that Miley Cyrus used in the last song for your film. Okay, cool. It was for a short film too. Like, oh, another couple thousand for this. It was like all these things, and it just turned out it was a dud. It didn't get into film festivals because it was too long. The story, you're like, what does this mean? Like, yeah.
I love
And
that.
so, yeah, so that's what like, and, lastly, maintain flexibility. Things are going to happen. Roll with it, be adaptable, have backup plans to pivot quickly. Um, and just go because things happen in this world in this age. you know the power may go out in your business, and it's just like, okay, let's hook up a generator and make it happen.
Right.
Weather may happen with your construction crews and delay you by weeks. So just like, how can you pivot? It's like how the pool companies have and lawn care companies have learned, what, that's great in the summer, but maybe during the winter we're gonna hang Christmas lights.
Yes, exactly. And that goes to resiliency too, right? Because not every season requires the same thing. Not
Mhm.
every market cycle, right?
Mhm.
So I started practicing law in 2011 when we were in the middle of the Great Recession. I was doing bankruptcy work, right? Well, not a lot of bankruptcy has been happening, in the last several years. But the market will change, and you have to pivot, and I think sometimes that adaptability is survivability, as you're saying, like, you have to be able to pivot. I really love that. Um, so I'm gonna take us back to the bees because I'm really
Okay.
interested. I love the bees. Um, I learned a little bit about bees kinda just preparing to talk to you today because I'll be honest, I was definitely a little ignorant about the bee situation.
But I have my sister, one of my sister's best friends is a beekeeper too. And so she
Oh,
posts her
nice.
videos. Yeah, she like posts her videos in her suits. And I'm always like, terrifying, but she just absolutely loves it. She takes such great care of those bees. And I learned that bees pollinate beyond their own hive. And, like they go out, they pollinate the rest of the world basically, right? Like without the bees, we would not have the ecosystem that we have. So they go and they share this growth while staying true to their own purpose. And I love this. How can businesses expand their brand while also maintaining that core identity that they have?
You have to clearly articulate like what your brand's financial or your brand's foundational principles are, right? Adhere to them consistently. Like consistency is key. Like going back to like, why did we start this? Why are we in this? And understanding that. So that's why, your mission, your vision early on, and really defining that even when it's just you in the company and growing from there. And then, choose opportunities that align with that. Like we all want more business, we all want more clients, unless you're trying to retire out, right? So, but you have to have partnerships that align with your values and with your priorities,
Mhm.
because if you don't, I'm not saying like if you're in retail, every customer is going to, but you're gonna have to have, especially if you have long-term clients, ones that respect your teams, don't abuse your teams. And it's so, and because if you don't have that, it's gonna be a lot of headache to deal with them. And then just having consistent messaging, through it. Um, so that's been my thing is like for in production, like figuring out the things that like are your brand and sticking to it.
I love it. I really love it. I think that, branding, we've seen a lot of change in branding recently, right? Like now it's a lot more about personal branding and uh, getting back to that authenticity that I
Mhm.
think can wane sometimes when you're always focused on grow, grow, grow. You kind of lose a little bit of that. I also really love what you said about just having this core focus and not necessarily everyone that comes into that ecosystem or everybody that you interact with when you're going out of your ecosystem is going to agree with it. But when you're looking for opportunities with people that are aligned on values, that's when you can really do great things. And I experienced this personally as well because I'm a very big proponent of conscious capitalism, right? And this idea of kind of purpose driven profitability.
Mhm.
But for a long time, I didn't really talk about that publicly. I don't know. It didn't seem that relevant. It didn't really seem like something that anybody would care about. And then once I started talking about it and like sharing that feeling and idea, now all these opportunities that are like the right opportunities for our business and what we're trying to achieve in the world have come because we just opened the door, like we went out of the hive, I guess, right? And we kind of like spread it out there. And now it's just kind of returning in this really organic way. So like that is the beauty of the beehive too. And we, by the way, I didn't actually talk to you about this, but I want to make a public service announcement. Please mind your pesticide use so that we can keep our bees. That's all. I just wanted to put that out there. These are important.
And one last point on that topic is avoid the weakness trap.
Ooh, what's that?
So the weakness trap is this: you always are looking at a business of everything you're doing wrong over and over and over. And you're like, okay, we haven't made this number, or anything else, but what are you doing right? And it's
Mm,
so important that you'll go hit those 5 points. You work really hard to get them. But in the meantime, have you lost your culture? Have you lost what you've done correctly? there's something that has gotten you into business and stayed and that your teams like. So like if it's bring them Friday pizza lunch every day, if it's whatever it is, the little things. I learned this from the film festival. There were certain things we did for filmmakers, and then we grew and got a lot bigger, and we're like, oh, we're cool and bigger. And they said, well, we miss when you did that certain lunch on that Wednesday for us, and we
Yeah.
got to meet other filmmakers, and that was like really cool. Or you picked us up from the airport, and we felt like we were really special. Like these little things, and we're like, oh wow, we give out now these big awards, and we're screening 4 times as many films, and we have Oscar nominees here, and all these other things. But so be mindful of what you're doing well and hold on to that so that you're maintaining your good and great and still going for the future.
Yes. I love that so much. The weakness trap. There's a good book too. It's called, I think it's, and I don't know the author, so we'll get that in the show notes for sure. But it's called The Gap and the Gain, I think. And it's the idea of like not always looking at the gap of where you're going, but actually turning around to look at the gain that you've made and
Mhm.
kind of like that progress, which really dovetails into exactly what you're talking about. Don't focus on the weaknesses. And I'll speak for myself here as a founder and an owner. I'm very guilty of this. I think I try to stay focused on the positive, and my team really does help me do that because
Mhm.
they are such positive people. But also, when we get into our meetings, and sometimes it's like, oh, like this last team meeting, I joined late. And so they had already gone through their personal and professional best, and like they're kind of segue into the meeting. And I missed that part. And
Mm.
that that part is so important because it's like it just grounds your whole team into a positive vibe and not just like, and now we're looking at our scorecard, and now and oh, this new client, we got to get this client on board. It's like strictly business. But when you focus on those wins, I think people just like open up, and it creates a positive working environment.
Well, it
um
gauges the temperature, and a beehive has to stay at a certain temperature. If it's too hot in there, if there's too much moisture, there can be mold, destroys the hive. If it's too
oh
cold, the bees are going to freeze in there. So, like what you're saying is like those things that you're doing with your team, weekly, that's so great and so important because if someone's maybe looking a little sad, or if you can take a little empathy, a little transparency, a little accountability, all these things we've talked about, and work it in with them and know what their temperature is.
it's true. And the humanity of it all,
Mhm.
right? um are you familiar with, I think it's a book called Clockwork, by Mike McCallowitz, if I'm not mistaken, but it references the queen bee role. Are you
I've
familiar
not
with this?
I've not read it. No, I haven't read it. I think I've heard of it, but I've not read it.
Yeah, and it is this idea of like there's one thing that we have to protect, and we have to define what that is. So like our law firm, it is lawyer time, right? The lawyer time is the time that is the most lucrative to our firm, and it's also the most valuable to our client. So then the queen bee role in a law firm would be lawyer time, right? Just like a doctor would be in a medical, and maybe even
Mhm.
for you, a producer would be right on a film set. Because if that role is not protected, then the rest of the team, the hive, is in detriment, right? And it risks the hive type of idea.
Mhm.
So yeah, it reminds me of that. And that was a very powerful business lesson that I took from that book. I love this conversation because I love bees. Number one, they're just so cute and fuzzy. And also, I think it's just the power of storytelling, just, bringing it back to the very first thing that we talked about today, which is what is your story and how did you get here? And it's been so great to learn more about the details of your story. I'm so grateful that you shared that with us. Do you have any parting words of wisdom for our audience that you want to leave them with today, Jeremiah?
You know what? Just business is hard, leadership is tough, but you're called into a special purpose by doing this. So, don't give up on it. Just keep on and take time for yourself, because your mental, physical, and spiritual health will be what you can give back to your teams.
Awesome. Absolutely. Great advice. Thanks again for taking time today. Jeremiah, where can you be found? We'll of course share that information in the show notes, but do you want folks to find you on LinkedIn? Do you want them to go to a website?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Jeremiah Bennett. Um, they can find me on X, they can find me on Instagram and all those, great things under my name.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming today and sharing your great insights. Everyone, take notes. Go to the show notes if you missed anything today. We will have everything there for you to connect with Jeremiah. And as always, thank you for joining us here on More Than Legal. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to More Than Legal. Stay sharp, stay curious, and stay tuned for our next episode. Bye for now.